One of the most influential tactics involved in creating better products largely goes unnoticed from the outside.
A lot of times in workshops, we use themes. And in this case, I believe the theme was like a soccer game. So they were brainstorming these offensive and defensive solutions. Those solutions eventually went into the product themselves and are helping to drive that retention. And so I think that we're able to see those connections that were made now between the product experience that's out there and how we got to that product experience.
Most organizations can recognize this when it happens. Team alignment that feels clear and focused, strategy that has everyone pulling in the same direction, and collaboration that's motivating and moves ideas into action. But the trouble is, many teams experience this less often than they'd like, and even more, have a hard time creating the factors that make it possible. Today on The Optimal Path, we'll uncover the powerful tool of workshops and how companies are leveraging them to generate more innovative ideas, drive stronger decision-making, and build more successful products. I'm Ash Oliver, and this is The Optimal Path, a podcast about user research and product decision-making brought to you by Maze. Our guest is Paige Bennett, Senior User Research Manager at Affirm. Prior to Affirm, Paige managed the growth and ecosystems research teams at Dropbox and has previous experience creating strategic research projects at Medium. She's well-versed in the world of workshop facilitation and user research, harnessing the two for big business impact. I'm delighted to be doing an episode with you, Paige. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, workshops, this is a topic we've covered once before on the podcast and one that you presented at the Maze conference, DiscoConf. But I wanted to go deeper, like a 200-level course, since you've deemed this the quote-unquote secret tool at Affirm. We will get more of the behind-the-scenes look at Affirm and discuss how workshops are delivering so much impact. But first, I wanted to open it up by asking, why workshops? What are the key reasons for incorporating them into the product development process?
I think of workshops as this power tool, and at Affirm, at least, the secret is out now. So we are really fielding workshop requests, which is really exciting from our partners and from teams across products. But workshops have the power to do 6 key things, and they're things that we need at any development stage when we're trying to create a product and launch a product. First of all, they're really, really good for generating new ideas, especially if you're starting at this space where you know the problem or you have a sense of the problem, but you have not gotten to the solution space yet. The second thing that they're super good for, and I see something that's really critical now, especially when we're in these like hybrid work environments or we're fully remote, and this can be a little bit trickier, is prioritizing resourcing and really understanding where you need to spend all of your time, where you need to spend your resourcing, and what gets deprioritized and why. The third thing they can do, drive alignment, super critical, especially across your different cross-functional partners. They can help you identify gaps, and this can be gaps where there's a resourcing need, but it can also mean knowledge gaps. And the last 2 things that workshops are super good for is inspiring your future experiences. Where would you go from here? What does your experience look like if your customer base changes, if they evolve, if something happens in the market, for example? And finally, they help you align on the actions that you need to take. So what are the immediate next steps? We have aligned on all of this great stuff. Now, what do we need to go do? And so everybody leaves having a similar sense of what they immediately need to tackle and what it's going to look like in the next week and 2 weeks and month and so on. If you've never been to a workshop, you can look at that and think, can workshops really do all of those things? And they absolutely can. And I think that that's what makes it this power tool that you can have.
There's so much that you covered in that, and I'm excited to dive into it more. But I think that's so specific, really seeing it as that catalyst in product development as it fosters collaboration and ideation and problem solving and alignment. I'm curious if you can discuss maybe some of the specific types of workshops that you've seen effective at Affirm, or maybe more specifically that could be valuable inside fintech?
I think there are two things here. One is that knowledge exploration of like, what do we not know? And how does that affect who our customers are? And especially within fintech, you're dealing with something that is highly emotional, money, and something that is ever evolving. And so your customers might even stay the same, but their mental frameworks in which they think about their money might shift. The market shifts. There's a round of layoffs that everybody is going through, for example, that might shift how they're thinking about their money. And so it's really important to do that take on, okay, who are our customers? What their current environment look like? And what do we not know about that? Especially within fintech, what you knew 4 years ago is not necessarily going to still be true today. And the way that your customers are handling their money might not be the same. And so that's like super, super critical to like really dig into. The other thing is thinking about the ideal experience. And I'll use an example of a bank. Think about your bank, the one that you've probably been with for like a decade or more, depending. And that might be your regular bank. And you might be very loyal to that bank. But when you start to think about maybe the customer experience, the app experience, is it a great experience? That's often because there's so much complexity within the fintech space when you're dealing with money. And so thinking about what does the ideal experience look like? Like, what would it look like if we remove these blockers? If we remove this comprehension issue, if we remove this area of complexity? I mean, if you just think about with your own example, what would your ideal experience look like with your bank? It likely looks quite different than what you have today. And so allowing people to think about that can be a really big unblock.
It brings up a question in terms of who might be best suited to facilitate these workshops. And for what you're highlighting, especially given your role as a research manager, do you feel that researchers are candidates for best able to facilitate these types of workshops?
I think in many ways we are. And some of that comes down to the skill sets that we have to employ in our research work. I mean, for example, we are often moderators in interviews. We're moderating a lot in what we do. And a really critical component of success to workshopping is having a good moderator and making sure that your team is moving along. And so I think that definitely tends to be a strong suit and why user research tends to lead these workshops. We partner very closely with design. And so we've been in many workshops where we've had designers lead the workshops. And we find that that is also something that we've had success with. Designers can really excel at leading workshops. When our partners have either not been part of a workshop in the past or they've never led a workshop, we find that it's really about teaching your partners best practices and giving them the tools that they need for what a successful workshop looks like. And then they can lead a successful workshop. So I would say that researchers are oftentimes wonderful at designing and moderating, leading workshops. It's probably going to feel natural to you in a lot of ways, but do consider your cross-functional partners as possible moderators and look to them as having a leadership role in workshopping. Maybe not right now if they've never done it, but consider it an area of opportunity. And so you are essentially training your cross-functional partners every time you have a workshop to eventually lead one, because you're hopefully giving them a very active role. There may be the note taker, the timekeeper. Maybe they're moderating a small group within the larger workshop. So they're building these skill sets that they might need to one day run their own workshop.
I love that, to be not just an involved participant, but also be building skills while playing a role. It makes me wonder how you got to this state. It's very clear that Affirm has taken on and seen the benefits from facilitating these workshops, but it's also not, someone's sole role, which is interesting to see actually across the industry, that there's companies like Airbnb that are now hiring for full-time internal facilitators for this very purpose. So I think this is where maybe Affirm is ahead of the curve. But I'm curious how you built the momentum for workshops and what challenges you may have encountered? What obstacles did you have to overcome in order to get the buy-in from putting forth these resources?
I'm lucky in that I've been able to have a healthy experience with workshops at different companies I've worked at. So when I was at Medium, there was very much the sense that workshops were important in research and design. And then Dropbox had a very healthy workshop culture. And I learned every time I was at a different company from wonderful facilitators. I learned from one of my fellow colleagues, Jennifer, who was a fantastic facilitator, and just really was able to hone my workshop skills. And I saw what they could do at different types of companies too. Medium was very small. Dropbox was obviously quite a bit larger, but I saw the power that they could have. And so when I came to Affirm, I knew where we wanted to get the research team, where we wanted to evolve the research practice and our partnership with product and with design. And I knew that workshops had the ability to do that. And we also were building out our teams. And as we were bringing more people into Affirm, those people had also had experiences with workshops. And so I was able to create a little team of advocates and build a case for workshopping. And then what you have to do with workshops is you have to prove through doing. And so we would run a little workshop and we would show the value that it was able to have, the impact that it was able to make. And that allowed us to make the case for the next workshop and the next workshop. And now we're in a place where we don't really have to make the case for the workshop anymore because they've seen the value. And so it takes time, but it's been a really fun journey to see it evolve.
I love that you had this little workshopper squad doing this roadshow internally to be able to, as you say, show, don't tell. I think that's a great technique to deploy, especially for workshops. Was there any objections that you came across in terms of the time? Because I can't help but think of the scenario where we've seen the age-old, we don't want to run research because it's going to cost us too much time. I could see the same kind of adage being applied to workshops.
There definitely were objections. I think that you'll tend to find that you're going to really battle with a couple of things. One is attention. One is time, for sure. The other can be budget. And so I think that time, absolutely. You get pushback on investment of time. And I think that there are a few ways you can address that. One is that you can align on what the goals and outputs are beforehand so that is very clear to your partners and so that you're able to show them, okay, we want to get here. So here's what we're going to do that. The other thing is to communicate expectations and timing. So show them the expected outputs. And, so we're expecting to be able to do these 3 things from this workshop. We need an hour and a half of your team's time. And sometimes when you put it in that way, they're able to see that an hour and a half is very little time, considering the amount of outputs that you're expected to glean. And then the last thing is, and this is going to be something you have to do, you have to prove through doing, but surface the time saved. So once you're able to get buy-in for that one workshop, when you are communicating the outputs and eventually the impact that it's made, also communicate the time that your team was able to save. So you were maybe able to save a few weeks in revving through different explorations. And that can certainly help because you're able to show your partners that we're saving you time. We're really saving you time in the end. And so that's how I found success in that. But you are going to get timing pushback.
Those are great recommendations. I'm wondering if we can dive a little bit deeper on the measurement of success. So it sounds like for sure this is set up in the expectation and alignment in the beginning, being able to showcase the value and the time saved. I'm wondering if there's any places that you've been able to showcase the success of the workshop as to how it led to improved product outcomes. Has there ever been any tie back to the workshop in that regard?
Definitely. And I think that there are 2 stages where you measure success too. And so one is going to be right after the workshop has happened. And that's where you're going to measure, did it meet the goals of the workshop? Did everybody participate and contribute? And then there's the measurement of success that's going to be at the end of whatever product stage you're in. So depending on the product stage, let's say you're in idea generation. You want to be able to measure, like, did the workshop help identify the direction that you're wanting to go in? Did it help you understand who your customer base was and what their problems are and use cases? Did it help you address a pain point, or did it help you iterate on an experience? And so depending on the product stage, you want to be able to show like how the workshop led to those outputs. And then it's about communicating it back to the team and to the partners. When your team is taking that next milestone step and they're now working on an experience based on what you were able to identify in a workshop, then you communicate that back to the team. When something is eventually able to be shipped, then when you're partnering with maybe your PM, maybe your designer on maybe that initial ship communication where they're talking about everything that they've done and here's the team involved, advocate for a line in there where they mention like, we identified XYZ initially in this workshop, because that'll communicate it out to a more broader audience as well, and partners who are, or your cross-functional stakeholders who maybe weren't part of the workshop. And so you're just beginning to almost play PR for workshopping, and make that case and shopping it around your company as well. It is up to you to make sure that you're drawing those lines, because realistically, not everybody might make them just naturally. So you do need to look for those lines, draw them, and then communicate them back to your team. And eventually, it's like a muscle. Eventually, your team is going to get to a point where they just know the value of workshops. They're going to be looking for those lines between what they've been able to do and how the workshop led to that. And you're going to have to spend less time making the case.
Maybe if you've led a workshop before or you've participated in one, you may be a little less familiar with how to be able to quantify that and get, buy-in for conducting more of them. So I think that's such great advice. I'm curious if there's maybe a story or an example that stands out to you where a workshop that you were involved in had some sort of tangible outcome in the product at Affirm.
I can think of several. I think if you look at our products today and the things that we've been able to share and ship, much of that experience, or especially I think recently, has come from user research and has come from workshopping to get to those insights. I think when we look at, how can we drive retention of our experience, for example, we held a workshop that was an insights and brainstorming workshop. So it was a little bit of a combo. And we wanted to really understand, one, can the solution that we want to build be used? And two, how can it be improved? And so the team went through an exercise where they selected the two insights that were most problematic to customers. And they were then able to brainstorm this like offensive and defensive solutions. A lot of times in workshops, we use themes. And in this case, I believe the theme was like a soccer game. So they were brainstorming these offensive and defensive solutions. Those solutions eventually went into the product themselves and are helping to drive that retention. And so I think that we're able to see those connections that were made now between the product experience that's out there and how we got to that product experience, and which has been really exciting. I think for a researcher, you do need to understand that it's not immediate, especially with our work when we're doing any research that's more, let's say, foundational or exploratory. There's a long tail. Know that there is this time frame in which you will be able to measure ultimate success, and be realistic about it. Know that, okay, in 5 or 6 months, I'm going to be able to see if the experience that we built into the product has moved the needle at all. So that I think is super helpful, just being able to be realistic about the timing of when you're going to see the final batch of results from the workshop.
Yeah, that's such a compelling story as well. It seems like there's so much workshopping that's happening at Affirm, and clearly have built the culture and championing for this to happen more often. I'm, again, just excited to see how more companies and teams start to adopt this. I'm wondering if maybe there's some sort of artifact or tracker that you've used to document the outcomes from the workshop. Is there some sort of repository of things that you use in order to do that?
So we do have Dovetail is our research repository itself that we have all of our reports in, but we also have our research projects, our scoping docs in there, and workshops are part of that. And so what we like about that is that Dovetail allows you to have, it has a pretty robust search function. And so you can search a keyword and be able to pull up all of the work that's associated with that. What I like about that is if you search for a keyword, let's say repayment, and it pulls up all of the research around repayment. It also pulls up all of the scoping docs and workshopping plans around repayment. So you're able to see this history with how the team got there. And, not just the research report, but the work that went into that research that was ultimately done. And so that's one really, I would say, easy way for us to have an artifact. Probably the easiest way for us to have an artifact that we can point the team back to, because all of product has access to Dovetail. We use FigJam extensively in workshopping, but because we are utilizing Dovetail as our single source of truth, and we're including those workshop plans in our scoping docs, it allows for people to see that history, that paper trail, and that can be super helpful.
I love that that's just kind of built into the workflow and process. This is a very clear example of the kind of maturity around not just workshops, but workshops that have been built into the research and collaboration processes at Affirm. So thinking about this kind of collaboration across teams and workshops being the vehicle to do so, have you ever done any like co-design or collaboration with users or customers inside of workshops? Has it ever gone external?
Yes. And this is probably some of my favorite workshopping has been when we've been able to bring in users. And I did this at Dropbox too. The Dropbox example was pre-COVID, so we were able to be in person, and we set up this workshop. It was an idea generation workshop that we set up almost like a design sprint, in that we held 3 of them throughout the week. And so we held, one on a Monday, for example, with our customers, iterated on the experience, then had the iterated experience on a Wednesday, once again with our customers, iterated on that experience, and then presented the final iterated experience on a Friday with customers. And it was such a cool experience. We've done something, although we weren't in person, quite similar at Affirm too, and it is super helpful. Co-creation is actually something that I utilize in my interviews, in my one-on-one research interviews quite often, if the question that I'm trying to get to would be really helped by that method. And so I love incorporating something like a co-creation with a customer into a workshop. It can be so powerful, especially if you have people attending the workshop that are not often in front of customers. It can be a super, super powerful tool.
Yeah, and I think that the balance that you're talking about here is important as well. And I think as people might build their skills in workshopping, you'll be able to tell what type of workshop for what scenario. Not everything needs to be a workshop.
Exactly.
When are the appropriate moments to maybe do this kind of co-creation with users? How much momentum that must have generated, and enthusiasm and engagement. How do you keep that going post-workshop and drive kind of this continuous improvement?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one of the things that workshops can help you do, right, is align on actions. And so having those milestones that you're setting before your workshop ends, of check-ins that you're doing with your team, progress reports, whether it's like a weekly sync of some sort, and making sure that you're already aware of those. And those can be really good for driving momentum. What you don't want to do is have a workshop where you haven't aligned on any actions as next steps and you don't have any milestones, because that's when the momentum fades. And that's when it becomes a lot more vague as to what value people got out of that workshop.
Yeah, I think that's really an important aspect. There's a lot of, planning that goes into this so that it doesn't just end when the workshop ends, as you mentioned. I want to circle back to a concept that you had introduced more at the top of the episode around the skills, and certainly being able to draw the parallels for UX researchers that might be well positioned to facilitate workshops. What do you see workshops contributing to the professional development or the skill enhancement of team members involved in product development?
Yeah, that's a really good question. A few different things I can see as helping really tie to their growth and their career development. One is their presentation skills. I think that it's great for a more junior researcher to step into a moderator role. And really, the way that you become a better moderator is by doing. It's great for a junior researcher who's wanting to build out their presentation skills because they are going to be speaking a lot. They're going to have to think about succinctly communicating with their team. And they're going to have to think about not just spoken communications, but written communications beforehand and after. And so those are all really good areas to refine their skills. The other thing that it can really be helpful for is, especially when you're trying to tie your workshop to a strategy, like my product team is taking on this strategy. They're deciding on this direction as an output from my workshop. That is super powerful because you are going to have to make the business case for your work impacting strategy when it comes to promotion cycle time, especially as you're wanting to grow from a mid-level researcher to a senior researcher. It's going to be expected that your work is impacting strategy. If you're able to show how your workshop was allowing your team to decide on a direction, that goes in your promotion packet.
I wonder, is there any resources or training that you've pointed your team towards or that you yourself have used in order to skill up in facilitating workshops?
That's a really good question. I think there are some good resources out there that are written. I think Google has a really robust design sprint practice, and they've written on their design sprints a lot. And there's obviously a lot of correlation between design sprints and workshopping. So I think going back and reading some of their resources, it always super, super helpful, as well as I'm obviously biased, but reading articles on Medium around workshopping is super helpful. Really, you learn by doing and by asking people to. One thing I would do at Dropbox is I was very privileged to work with some excellent senior and staff researchers, and they were very seasoned in their ability to run workshops. And so I would draft my workshop plan and I would send it to them and have them look at it. And the feedback that they gave me was so super valuable. I learned so much from just having them read my workshop plan and say, like, this works, this wouldn't work, and why. And also observing them, just observing how they facilitated, how they took surprises and things that we wouldn't expect to happen, and they just ran with it. It's similar as to being able to observe seasoned researchers moderating an interview. You just learn so much.
Yeah, great advice. I think for sure there's a lot of resources out there. And to your point, the Sprint book even by Jake Knapp is a good place to get started. Although it's, kind of very specific to the design process. There's a lot of adaptability from that. But I think that the best technique there is to start trying your hand and leverage the people that have maybe done this before to help provide that guidance. I want to ask you kind of some forward-looking questions in terms of how AI might be incorporated into workshops or how it might reduce the need for workshops, for example. So what do you believe the impact of AI might have on workshops in the coming years?
Yeah, I think it could become a very powerful tool in terms of competitive research. Let's say an idea generation workshop where you're trying to really cover that knowledge base of what you know and what you don't know. Competitive research is likely a component of that. What third-party research is out there that could help us with this? What do we know about our competitors' experience? And so I can definitely see AI as a tool of being able to gather and synthesize that. I think as AI becomes better and better about pulling in relevant and responsible and trusted material, it can become a powerful tool in being able to gather that. It could cut down on the timing of pre-planning in your workshopping. I don't think it will be a replacement because part of the power from workshopping is getting the people in the room and thinking about this, getting them out of their own heads, getting them to think about explorations, getting them to take a strongly held assumption and realize that that's what it is. And so I don't think that AI will ever be able to replace that ability, but it could become a really powerful tool in shortening the timeline which could be an even better business case for companies where that's a big factor is timing or resourcing it, or I don't have time to pull together all of the competitive research that I need to do before this. And so if it could accelerate that, then it might mean that it opens up workshops to happen even more frequently at some companies.
Yeah, and that I think could really be a force multiplier for, what is able to be accomplished. So it's very exciting to think about. Paige, this has been great. I mean, I totally think that this has been a even deeper dive into this topic. For anyone that didn't catch your DiscoConf presentation last year, they should check that out. I think it's a great accompaniment to this episode. I share, your love and enthusiasm for workshopping, so it's been really fun to talk to you about it.
It has been. Thank you so much.
I want to transition to our last segment of the episode. This is where we ask some personal questions just to get to know each guest.
Mm-hmm.
And my first question for you is, what's one thing that you've done in your career that you think has helped you succeed that few others do?
So I used to be a news reporter. My background is in journalism, and I was a TV reporter right out of college. When I transitioned into user research, one thing I did was I still looked at my stakeholders, anybody that I was speaking to, presenting to with my research insights as my audience, just like I would think about when I was a news reporter. And we knew many things about our audience. So when I was taking really complicated information, I was covering, for example, some very complicated insurance stories right after a major hurricane. And I had to really put it in layman's terms. And I did the same approach in thinking about my stakeholders and people that were perhaps at the time like very skeptical of research. I studied them as if I would study my audience, and I communicated to them with that knowledge. I really did hone it to how I thought that they would best take that information, like I would have if I was a news reporter. I thought about like, what's my headline? What's the hook? And I did that and continue to do that. And I found it to be quite successful in my communication, because communication is so critical for success as a user researcher.
I love the transferable skills there. That's great advice. My next question is, what is the industry-related book that you've given or recommended the most, and why?
So it is definitely Jan Chipchase's The Field Study Handbook. And I give it to people who might never, ever be on the field. And I think especially now in this post-COVID world, a lot of our field work has gotten paused. It's been paused. But coming from a television background, and then I did ethnography in the Middle East for several years, our customers are not using our products in isolation. There is a whole environment happening around them, and that is affecting how they use our products, whether it's the subway or their home or their internet connection or a million other things. And even if we're never going to be able to get into a room with them and physically their environment, understanding those factors and how we can observe and understand those factors and understand how it affects their behavior with our product is really, really critical. And I love that, like the Field Study Handbook, it gets you into that mindset of like people are more than just their actions, the mental frameworks, the cultures, all of those aspects that are impacting their behavior. And becoming this student of observation is even more difficult to do in a remote environment. And that's why it's even more important. And so I love that book, and I recommend it to anyone, even if they will never step foot in the field, so to speak. They will only ever do research over Zoom. It is still, I think, so valuable to read.
I wasn't actually familiar with that one, so I'm really excited to check that out. My last question is, what is an unusual habit or an absurd thing that you love?
I have an unusual skill when I was thinking about this that I actually bring into my work. This is going to sound so random, but I tell you, there is a tie here. First of all, one thing I love is listening to, I'm in New Orleans, so maybe this is just par for the course, but listening to jazz music in the morning as I am going through my emails. Love it. I turn on my little lamps and my candle, and I just have a good old time before my meetings start. That's something I love. Unusual skills that I have, I gained in the time that I was working on the field in several countries throughout the Middle East. And that is that I am I'm not making this up, I'm a trained hostage negotiator. I have skills to negotiate should I ever be in a hostage situation. And I gave a talk a year and a half ago about the ties between the skills I learned as a hostage negotiator and how we work with our cross-functional partners. And there's a lot of good ties that I could go into, but a lot of it comes down to like observing, understanding your environment, communication. And so I've been able to bring that into my work here, which sounds ridiculous, but true. And so I just think that's really funny. I always get like a little cackle out of thinking about that.
I would have never guessed, but I could also see you're such a poised and articulate and calm person and presence. So I feel like you must have been very successful at that. Paige, this has been so much fun. I really appreciate you being here and sharing all of your experience across all of the companies you've been a part of and how you've been able to lead workshops there. So thank you so much for sharing this.
Thank you so much for having me. I've loved chatting about this.
Thanks for listening to The Optimal Path, brought to you by Maze, the continuous product discovery platform designed for product teams. If you like what you heard today, you can find resources and companion links in the show notes. If you want to hear more or subscribe to the podcast newsletter for exclusive content, you can find The Optimal Path by visiting maze.co/podcast. And send us a note with any thoughts or feedback to podcast@maze.design. And until next time.